Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast, everybody. Here we're interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we will be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the journeys of our guests so that we can all better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Hello, today we are thrilled to welcome Lelia Sandoghdar, an organizational psychologist whose journey is deeply rooted in exploring purpose and meaning at work. Having recently completed her PhD from King's College London, Anna combines academic expertise with a genuine passion for helping people find greater fulfillment in their professional lives. Through her research, Anna has delved into how organizations can foster a sense of purpose and improve the meaningfulness of work for their employees. But beyond the data and the theories, she's driven by a personal mission to transform workplace cultures, helping leaders and teams build environments where people truly feel belonging and engaged. Anna brings a unique mix of academic rigor and heartfelt dedication to this work. Her insights and personal journey will help us all think more deeply about how purpose can shape not just individual careers, but entire organizations. I hope you enjoy. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Excitable Soul Podcast. We've got Anna here with us today. Hey Anna, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm excited for today's conversation. A little bit nervous.
Well, welcome. We were just talking before we started about like trying to get, podcast etiquette and not cut across one another. And then we've both decided that's not going to work because there's too much energy, too much ADHD. And so we're going to dance across each other in this conversation today.
Yes, absolutely. I'm ready to dance.
Amazing. So you bring a really kind of unique perspective to this purpose conversation, Anna, in that not only is it something that you are deeply passionate about, like you work in the world of purpose, but it's obviously had a significant impact on you in terms of the choices and decisions that you're making and have made so that you've kind of ended up where you are. So I guess before we dive into the journey, I'm just kind of interested in how you make sense of what purpose is, like where, like the concept in its own right. What does that look, feel, and sound like from your perspective?
Ooh, starting off with the big questions. For me, purpose, and I should probably have like the one big academic definition that I use, but I don't have, just one kind of sentence that would sum it up for me. But I think for me, it's this intangible, long-term goal is not the right word, but just this long-term cause that you commit your life to, that lets you kind of cut through the noise and really defines for yourself based on your own experiences and strengths and interests, how you want to make a contribution to the world. And that can be as big or small as you want. It doesn't have to be saving lives, Doctors Without Borders level. It can be just, I want to make sure that I leave a really positive, lasting impression on the people close to me. And I'm trying to make sure that I can help other people find their sense of purpose, or help businesses make sure that their employees can have a sense of purpose, because I just believe that it kind of drives all our other well-being, really. And the way that I started getting into the, I guess, world of purpose is during my master's at the LSE, there was a class called happiness. And I would say I'm always pretty much, my baseline mood is always happy, I would say. So I was just trying to really understand how you can make other people happy. And, a lot of that is usually about kind of like positive emotions and so on. And I guess focusing on pleasure, I think, a lot of times. But really, this course ended up really surprising me because, yes, half of it was about pleasure, but the other half was really about purpose. And I think, purpose is a very intangible thing. And I think I'd always had a very strong sense of purpose. But for the first time during that course, I realized that you can really define what purpose is, and that there have been studies that measure people's levels of purpose, or can kind of show how purpose is a great precursor to all these other positive things in life. So I think that's kind of where it started, and then it just hooked me ever since, I guess.
Amazing. And there's something I find really interesting about the kind of the parallels between happiness and purpose, in that both of them seem to be outcomes of other stuff. Like,
Yeah.
you can't just chase purpose like for purpose sake, in the same way that you can't just chase happiness for
Yeah.
happiness sake. Like, happiness is like the byproduct of being able to connect with and action do some really important stuff, and so you have to think about what those things are in order to be able to get that kind of outcome and byproduct. And there's something really similar about that for purpose as well, which people are kind of like, what is my purpose in life? And how do I find my purpose? And they kind of hold this thing up as being like the source, and you're like, well, I'm not so sure that's the mechanism. The mechanism is, what are you doing to be purposeful, and how is purpose the outcome of understanding some other stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you make of that? That seems like a bit of a parallel in my brain, but I don't know whether that kind of speaks to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good observation. And I think that sometimes it's almost like as you say, like a chicken and egg situation. What do you start with first? And I think the thing with purpose is also that, I mean, it can change, right? It can change according to the life phase that you're in. And, you don't have to have just one. There might be a kind of overarching theme that, is running through all your different types of purposes. But I think what it seems like you're saying is that it can sometimes be a struggle when you're almost focusing too much on finding that core purpose, that you think that this is going to be the answer to everything. And really, I think if you focus on just your values as a person, and you do that for a long time, and you consistently follow your kind of intuition and your gut feeling, you will automatically have kind of your experiences will start to add up to a point where you can then see that there is a consistent theme, and that theme is likely to be related to your purpose. But I think to just start right away and say, oh my God, I need to have a clear sense of it.
It has to be this thing. Like, and what is this thing? Yeah, for sure.
It's a lot of pressure.
So I think that you're in a really unique position for us to maybe kind of flush some stuff out here, which is, ultimately you are a researcher on this topic. And so by very definition, it's like, what are the measurable elements of it? Yet in the first 5 minutes here, you've kind of gone gut feel, intangible, intuition, like the kind of the felt nature of it. So help people who are listening kind of square that circle. Like, the difference between if you can't measure it, it can't be real, to it's actually a really deeply intuitive kind of experience.
Well, I think I have to preempt this by saying, yes, I'm a researcher, but my research is qualitative. And I don't know if purpose lends itself that much to quantitative research for exactly the reasons that you've highlighted. I think there is such a subjective and deep personal element to it that I'm not sure that measuring it is always the best form. I think, Brene Brown says stories are data with a soul. Is that the right way around?
No,
or data is stories with a soul? No, stories are data with a soul. Sorry. And I think I think I completely believe that. So there are, of course, ways that you can try and measure how aware someone might be of their own sense of purpose. But I don't know how helpful that is. I think really the sense of purpose can be so intangible that it only really comes out in these deep personal conversations. And I think a lot of times people actually have a sense of purpose without being aware that it is a sense of purpose, or without being able to articulate it. So I think it sometimes just comes out in these conversations that might be about completely different things. And interestingly, in my research, when I asked someone, how meaningful do you find your work, they find that really difficult to answer. But if I ask them, tell me about the contribution in your work, tell me whether you feel that your work is allowing you to be your most authentic self. Tell me about whether your work is allowing you to consistently learn and grow. Then, you kind of add up all those different elements, and I say, okay, so you do find your work meaningful, because I mean, that's pretty much what it's made out of as a dimension. So
yeah, it's kind of that's the aggregation of all of those
right.
bits, like kind of delivering the outcome. Um, yeah, nice. And I love that kind of just ownership of, well, maybe measurement isn't the thing here
Mm-hmm.
actually, or being able to quantitatively measure isn't the thing, because how much does that actually serve us, and how much more important could it be just to be able to surrender to the fact that we're talking about soulful experiences. We're talking about emotional data here. And that's as rich and as significant and as influential as anything that you might be able to put a number on. And let's just be okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I understand the need that, I mean, especially let's say in a business environment, that people would want to have some kind of quantitative measure of, what's the percentage of our employees that feel that their work is purposeful? So yes, of course you can ask those questions, but I think it has to be combined with digging deeper and understanding what are the mechanisms that are allowing people to feel purposeful, or is there, maybe there's even a common theme across, let's say, the type of employees that we have, of a purpose that they share, and how can we utilize that, and so on. So it's not that I'm against measuring, but I think I'm cautious of the extent to which measuring can always be the end answer for everything.
Nice, lovely. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to kind of hijack the conversation immediately and kind of get into a bit of the kind of the granularity of the territory around your work. But I'm keen to just get an understanding of how, when you reflect back over your journey to date, like where and how do you see meaning and purpose having influenced some of the choices that you're making, either intentionally or unconsciously?
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions I was scared of because no, not scared, but it's interesting because I'm usually asking those types of questions, and then you realize that actually you don't necessarily reflect on your own sense of purpose that often. But yeah, I mean, first of all, I do think that a lot of people, and maybe not for everyone, but certainly for me, my childhood had a huge impact on, I guess, how I see the world, which then informs your sense of purpose. So, I come from a multicultural family. My mother is German, my dad is Iranian, and I grew up in Germany and Switzerland, and we lived in the States for a while, and then I went from the age of 16, I went to school in the UK. So I think there was a lot of exposure to different types of thinking and different cultures. And really, I think that was what started my fascination with trying to understand different people's perspectives, their emotions, where they come from, and realizing that I had this ability. Maybe it wasn't even an ability in the beginning. I think it was just an interest in mediating between those perspectives. And, I think that kind of started my path in psychology. And then I do remember very clearly, for the longest time, I just wanted to go into clinical psychology. I wanted to be a therapist. And so I remember clearly that during the end of my time in my bachelor's at university, I realized that I had this drive to help people, but that it didn't necessarily need to be on a one-to-one basis. And there were other things that were interesting me when in my other modules about organizations and so on. And so I remember, I think that was the first moment where I really became very aware that I had a sense of purpose, but that the way that you live out that sense of purpose doesn't have to always be, according to that plan that you had 5 years ago. And so I really wrestled with it, because there was this part where I realized, no, I think I want to go and, have a clearer understanding of businesses and how I can help in businesses. But then there was this voice that kept telling me, but like, oh, but then are you truly helping people? Because surely the impact that you can have, working with a patient one-to-one might be larger than if you're being hired by an organization, which maybe ultimately they're hiring you because they think that you can elevate people's productivity rather than a genuine care for people's well-being. And I think those types of questions were the first time that I realized that I had this internal need to help people, but also this like almost moral part of it where I wanted to help people for the right reasons, and I was trying to grapple with whether I'm doing it for the right reasons or not, and so on. So that's just one example that I could come up with. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, the thing that kind of I'm really curious about, the thing that kind of drew my attention is when you use that language of sense of purpose, and you kind of use it so naturally in that it didn't feel like it was I guess it goes back to the intangible bit, right? It didn't feel something solid that was truly understood, but it definitely was having an influence.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of sense of, I want to help people, but it's more than that. Because, and the stress testing of it was, I thought I wanted to do this thing, but now that I'm actually confronted with this and I've experienced a little bit more, I have this sense of, no, it's beyond that. It's more than that. But I still don't know what it is, but I know it's not that. And so almost even in these kind of more formative experiences, the influence around choice and decision making was starting to come to the fore because you were open to, I guess, this sense of intuition and the acknowledgement that just helping people isn't a sense of purpose. It's actually, what's my contribution in that?
Right, absolutely. And I think the key thing is the intuition bit, because I think in the end, really what that taught me was to listen to myself and say, okay, but what is it that is suddenly drawing me away from what I previously thought I wanted to do to this new exciting opportunity? And what am I trying, like, how would my life be different if I took these two different paths? And what is it about these different paths that I like or don't like? And I think in the end, if you ask yourself all these questions, you really do distill your sense of purpose to its kind of core elements. And you understand that, A, you can always come back to other choices, no choice is written in stone. And B, you realize, what feels authentic and what is kind of the core essence of who you are and how can you best let that shine through. And for me, I realized that actually I wanted to maybe not necessarily go as deep with one person into all of their life's problems, but actually think about more systemically, what can psychologists do in order to help people experience their lives on a meaningful level. And, we spend so much time at work. So I felt actually, in my case, I think I'm better suited to helping people through that method rather than one-on-one.
Yeah, amazing. So there seems to me like if we go back to the kind of the start of the question, there's something here about the journey that you have been on and how those kind of formative years shaped your curiosity around people and how people work and what's important to them, with kind of a narrow focus that ultimately kind of got blown up and opened out the more you explored it, and the more you kind of kept yourself open. Where and how else do you think those kind of early formative years started to shape the kind of the meaningful nature of the experiences that you have today? So if like helping people was one of them, what else kind of emerges for you when you think back over your timeline and your journey? Like what are the moments that really feel like they've shaped who you are in the world today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's moments, and then I guess there's people.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's actually almost hard to separate those two because one shapes the other. I think for me, first of all, my parents, I have a very close relationship to my family, and both my parents my mother doesn't practice in academia anymore, but both of them actually did a PhD, and both of them had this very kind of rigorous way of thinking about the world, and both of them in completely different fields. My dad is a physicist. My mom was a philosophist. So completely on opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think both of them in their own way always had a very core sense of purpose themselves. And I saw through their role modeling that the way that they approached their work was never in endeavor of, financial profit, for example. I mean, of course, you need that element to a certain extent, but that was never what was driving their decision making. And I saw them sometimes turn down certain jobs or pursue certain avenues that were just purely based out of their personal curiosity and wanting to learn more and wanting to contribute to something. So for my dad, it was to science. For my mother, it ended up being much more, I guess, similar to me, to people. And she now, helps people within academia kind of restructure the I guess, academic experience and so on. So I think from a very early age, without even realizing at the time, had this role model of what it looks like to pursue your sense of purpose. And, also it comes through in small things such as like conversations that you have as a family when it comes to deciding, what to choose in your A levels or what to do at university. It was never like, oh, well, why don't you study this? Because, there's career opportunities. It was always just, well, what is interesting you? What do you think you're good at? What do you like doing? And these really kind of deep conversations about just who you are as a person and what you can maybe do with it. And never any kind of judgment on, oh, this is a good career path or this is a bad career path and so on. And then I think another thing was maybe just, if I'm thinking about a moment, when I was 16, as I said, I started studying in the UK, and I did that on my own. I don't know why, but I just decided when I was 15 that I needed to go to boarding school and that it needed to be in the UK, and that I wanted to basically leave everything behind and just go do my own thing. So, yeah, that was probably a very formative moment. And I think, again, in the moment, I didn't realize what that was doing to me. But looking back, the fact that I moved by myself to just start a new life in a new country at the age of 16 probably did have a very big impact on also how I see myself as, I guess.
All right, so the Hogwarts adventure and becoming a wizard was kind of one of those significant moments that really sort of shaped who you are and the kind of the way in which you view the world now. One of the things that always strikes me when we talk about purpose and the kind of the significance of a sense of purpose is that ultimately you're making a contribution to something that feels really important and significant and can define a sense of self-worth from the inside out. Like, it's not about necessarily trying to meet external expectations. It's about you knowing who you are and feeling that kind of intrinsic value in relation to those things. How do you make sense of that for yourself now, like where you are in the journey given those kind of formative experiences? Like, where does your sense of self-worth come from and how do you define it now?
Yeah, this is a interesting question, and I would be very impressed with people who can come up with an answer right away, because I wish I had one clear answer. I feel like a sense of self-worth is something you feel, but really getting to the bottom of where it comes from is quite tricky, actually. Um, I mean, definitely all the experiences that I talked about previously, and including, also experiences with my family, I do think that kind of set me up with a pretty healthy sense of self-worth, kind of from the beginning. And I was lucky to just have kind of this unconditional support around me. But I think in my kind of later years, it definitely developed when I started realizing that I was good at something that I enjoyed doing, So once I started my studies at university, and I realized that I was not only enjoying it and interested in it and putting effort into it, but I was actually getting positive feedback for that. I do think that had kind of an exponential effect on my sense of self-worth, because it made me realize that, I guess my gut feeling of what I wanted to do was leading me into the right direction. It doesn't mean that it's all positive, or that, you never have moments of self-doubt, or that you don't have negative feedback. But I think it just made me kind of trust that I was doing something worthwhile, and that I was on some kind of right track. And even if that track were to change, or, that I had navigated certain complexities enough times to know that if there is a challenge that comes up, in one way or another, you will face it and you will get through it. And I think, that can range from the smallest things, such as suddenly living in like, Europe's biggest city, and you've done it for 6 months and you realize, oh, actually, that's cool. Like, I've been here for 6 months and I now know how to get the tube, and I now need, like little things that I'm sure every person has, to, as I say, kind of more, I guess, concrete examples to do with, I guess, how you spend your time and where you put your priorities and your effort. So I think, yeah, I think I probably started having a real sense of self and self-worth maybe from like the age of 20 onwards, I would say. I think before that also, the teenage years can be tricky, I think, for anyone, no matter what environment you're in. I think there's always a sense of doubt because you're comparing yourself to all these other people around you, and everyone wants to be cool, and the typical teenage stuff. Um so yeah, I probably, once I started realizing that people were really interested in, I don't know, maybe what I thought, I mean, this is in stupid little ways, like just writing an essay and someone saying, oh, interesting point, and you just think, yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you.
There's so many kind of really big concepts in there, Anna, to kind of wrestle with, in terms of you use the language of realizing that the stuff that you were interested in was actually worthwhile, and being able to define what worthwhile meant. And not only that, but this idea of, not only was it worthwhile, but I was good at it. And so there's something here about how you define worthwhile has to come back down to something that you feel is meaningful by very definition, right? Because it has
Right.
worth associated with it. And then there's something about being good at it, as in people were interested in my perspective. So I have a kind of a unique view. I offered that, and the feedback was, that's useful. So there's a sense of contribution to something
Yeah.
again. And I love that the kind of the tipping point or the shift here was, there's a period of time where comparison is everything. Like, what are your peers doing? What is cool? Like, what are those expectations that you're trying to meet? And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm really interested in this, and I'm actually creating a level of competence around it. Like, I'm doing these things repeatedly, whether it's kind of schoolwork or whether or not it's kind of catching the tube. So there's some confidence that's being built in that. There's repeatability in that. I've acknowledged now that there's something that I really care about, and I feel like I'm making a contribution to it, and it's worthwhile. And now that's then sort of started to, I guess, build the momentum that's led to where you are today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the you know the research has shown that the competence is a huge part of feeling, I guess, just on a broader level, meaningful existence, right? Like feeling like you can express your full potential, whatever that potential is. The first step is, I guess, realizing, where your natural tendencies to, or your natural strengths are, and your interests. So it's not only, I might be good at something that I don't care about, but finding kind of the overlap between what you're interested in and what you're good at, and then actually feeling like you're in a position to consistently work on that and actually get better. And that's, I guess, also where that sense of purpose comes in, because you're never done. You're always continuously working towards it, and as you work towards it, it changes shape, and it starts having different facets and so on. But so then that is definitely a big part of it. And then I think it's interesting what you say about how you define worthwhile. And again, I think that's a really personal thing. But interestingly, it's not just personal, right? It's also like we are social animals, and the phase of comparison might have stopped, but I think where you grow up, and whether it's a cultural thing or a social thing, your idea of what is considered worthwhile will always be, to a certain extent, also influenced by what society thinks is worthwhile. So, the idea of what is a worthwhile contribution is kind of an element of and this is not just me saying, speaking my own opinion. This is my supervisor, Katie Bailey, has just published a paper on this, which I thought was really interesting. it's kind of a combination of three things. It's kind of A, do I feel that my contribution is worthwhile? B, do other people think that this contribution is worthwhile? And C, am I competent in achieving that contribution? Like, do I know that I could potentially pursue it? And again, there might not be an end point, but do I feel like I can somehow get closer and closer and closer to my goal? So yeah, absolutely, those two elements of competence and worthwhile, I think, are a theme that kind of runs through when people try and crystallize what their sense of purpose is.
And it has to, one of our previous guests, Scott Allender, who's an exec at Warner Music, he really talked about trying to kind of understand the sense of purpose as the need that he was trying to meet in himself and the need that he was trying to meet in the world around him, and the kind of the interconnection between those two things. And I really felt like that was a kind of a beautiful articulation of so many complex different things, which is, to acknowledge that meaning and meaning making is a deeply human experience, and that ultimately a sense of purpose is meeting a need for people to feel like they're making a contribution because of the fact that we are social animals. And it's not just about us, it's about the people around us and the world that's around us. And so if we feel like we're meeting a need that's not just for us but for the people around us, then it's almost like a multiplier effect in that kind of sense of self-worth and value, etc.
100%.
And it feels to me like there is and I don't know whether there's either research around this or you just kind of have a perspective on it yourself, but part of the challenges that we face in kind of modern society is the deconstruction of the social, communal interconnectivity. And that's almost why organizations become so critical, is that in lots of different places where people would come together, they don't anymore, but the place that they still do come together is in the work environment. And so to your point, for purpose to exist in that environment isn't just about the productivity and output of the business, it's also about the soul of human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. First of all, I think that kind of tension between the self and others is a inherent paradox in experiencing and maybe also achieving, if you can say, meaningfulness in your work, but maybe also, in broader life. It doesn't have to be through work. So I think it can become tricky because, as you say, ideally you would meet your own needs and meet the needs of others. Where it becomes tricky is when you are in a situation where one is kind of opposes the other. And I think that's where it becomes important to remember that purpose in the end is a dynamic construct, so that certain situations will require you to either put others or yourself first. And you just have to kind of trust that through the motions of life, you're going to go up and down, and you might put one over the other and then the other, and then at some point it averages out, and at some point that balance is achieved. But that balance doesn't mean that you have to have 50-50 all the time.
Yeah.
It can be 40-60. So I think that's a really good way of putting it, is trying to find something that allows you to do both, even if it's not always exactly the same. And then to your point about organizations, I 100% agree. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of also thinkers that have, not just from a psychology perspective, but a sociology perspective, that have kind of argued, well, the decline of these kind of institutions that were giving us a sense of community, but B, also a clear sense of purpose, such as religion, and the church, has kind of led to people thinking also more about the meaningfulness of their existence. So I think if we look back, let's say 200 years, I'm not sure. I mean, of course, there were philosophers and so on, but I'm not sure that this was just like something that people were constantly talking about, right? And now suddenly we find ourselves in an era where everyone's trying to find their why or follow their passion. And really, I think it's come also from, I mean, of course, our more basic needs are met. So maybe we have more mental capacity to start thinking about the more kind of the self-actualization needs. But I do also think that there's an element of it, as you said, that where we got that sense of clear kind of anchoring from previously is not a source anymore, at least for a lot of people. And now we're looking towards other arenas to kind of fulfill that need for a meaningful existence. And because we spend so much time at work, that's kind of the first thing where our mind goes. And so really, fostering a sense of purpose at work is not necessarily only about giving people the space in their confined job roles to do the things that they enjoy doing. It's really also about fostering the sense of belonging, a sense of shared values, a sense of kind of shared contribution, or where are we going as a group? Like, what is it that we're really trying to do as a collective? And I think if you can kind of capitalize on those, well, capitalize is the wrong word, but if you can kind of like foster those feelings, then even if you're not 100% fulfilled in your job role because maybe you have to do some boring admin tasks, overall you're going to feel that your work is worth it and that your time is worth it.
Yeah, and I've been in two different conversations this week with two separate groups of senior leaders, two very different organizations, and in both places they quoted the classic JFK story of visiting NASA, and speaking to the janitor who's sweeping and cleaning the floor and asking him about his role, him saying, "Hey, look, I'm just trying to put a man on the moon," and I'm always intrigued that story has stuck the test of time. One thing, like the randomness of these two different conversations, and that this showed up in both places, but also the significance of it in that my act, the task, my role isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to define the meaning that comes with the contribution that I'm making. Like, my task actually is something that is part of the whole, and the parts, that the whole is greater than the parts. It aggregates up to something that is intangible. If we close that loop and go back round again, it becomes more than the sum of, and that feels hopeful. It feels kind of optimistic. It feels inspirational, but it also feels like it can be tangible and real, in that you will have seen, as much as I will have seen, that people are kind of conflating their sense of self-worth or their purpose with how good they are in their job, because work has such a high level of significance in their world. And that can be really quite damaging, because if you have a bad day at work, then you feel bad as a person. Or if something goes wrong that's out of your control and out of your sphere of influence, you feel like you failed. And that can be really, really detrimental, to your point, on people's sense of well-being in the work environment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, that story about putting a man on the moon, that's definitely kind of the I guess the most famous research paper that has then kind of trickled down. And I know that a lot of organizations are kind of using this as I think it was KPMG that did this whole initiative where they were trying to kind of collect these stories of other people, of their people, and they somehow came, you get from very kind of individual contributions to I'm an accountant to I'm helping people face climate change. So really what that shows is, in the end, meaningfulness is something that needs to be interpreted, which is very hopeful, I think, because it gives you the sense of hope that even if you are stuck in a bad position, and I'm not saying that there aren't also, jobs or positions where it's entirely devoid of meaning, maybe if you're just consistently, I don't know, working on the same thing and you're not getting anywhere or so on. But it also opens up the opportunity of saying, you know what, I'm going to make the best of my situation, and I'm going to find the things within my control that I want to focus on and that I want to actively nourish and foster, that will give me a sense of meaning. So I think I completely agree with you that, but I also think that that's when you kind of can get into the territory of, having to make sure that you're also staying realistic, or that organizations are staying realistic and not taking advantage of that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
yes, it's great that the janitor said he's putting somewhere on the moon, but you also don't want to get to a point where, organizations are clearly exploiting people and they're saying, no, but you're doing this in the greater good of blah, blah, blah. And I think, that's also, there's some stories about WeWork, about very, very cult-like behaviors that kind of arose from this sense of, no, we're all doing this for a greater cause and we're really trying to change the world. And it's like, no, what you're doing is slightly dubious. But yeah.
The fine lines ever with
Yeah.
ethics in business. Yeah, for sure. I love that. So, what I'm wondering, and I'm interested now, Anna, when you look forward, kind of given where you are on your journey, and you think about how purpose might shape the choices and the decisions to come, like what does that look like for you? Where do you feel like the leaps of faith are on your horizon, and how purpose might help you kind of go into that with I guess just a sense of hope and optimism of what might be?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time for me because I have just kind of finished the PhD, which is a very long, and I guess I didn't realize how long it would feel, a very long process that really requires all your mental energy and physical energy. So to come out of it when you've been focusing on one goal for so long, a very, very concrete goal, to suddenly be in this space of uncertainty and also opportunity is an interesting experience. And I think it kind of on a meta level, my research is about purpose and meaning, and now I'm kind of confronted with my own purpose and meaning, and it really requires you to think about it in a very concrete way. Like, how do I now want to operationalize this sense of purpose, and how can I best do that? And so I think, I'm consistently thinking about it, and I think to your point about it being hopeful, it does give you a sense of trust in the future, because it means for me that because I know exactly how I want to contribute, where I do it or exactly how I do it is almost not as important. Of course, you want to find the right job and you want to find the right organizations and you want to have a nice coworker and so on. But really, it allows you kind of, again, cut through the noise and say, if I am in a position where they allow me to use my expertise for the better and in order to help other people, then that should be enough for me, and that should at least give me some kind of like jumping board. So I think it's helping me also make decisions about what's important. So things such as, is it ticking all my boxes? It just allows you to kind of crystallize your thinking and say, you know what, the most important parts are these and these and these, and that my values are kind of aligned with the company or the job, and so the rest, you just trust that it's somehow going to kind of fall into place. I mean, that sounds very wishy-washy, but I do think it kind of helps you in your decision making, especially when
Yeah.
you're in a time of uncertainty. It comes back to just feeling your gut feelings and just kind of like following and listening to your own sense of self, really. Yeah.
And I love this the kind of the differentiation here of the what and the how. There is kind of some debate around it,
Mm.
and there is and well, it's not debate; it's openness. There is openness because actually, as long as it comes clearly um, from meaning and has clear contribution to the things that you actually care about, then actually where you work, on what you're working, and how you go about working, there's a kind of an openness to different possibilities because it's going to feel right if you kind of pay attention to that bit. And I love the fact that it comes back down to um, choices and decision making that is being influenced by intuition,
Yeah.
and that kind of rich sense of data that's going, actually I have some boundaries over this, and it's not going, has to be this salary, has to be this organization, has, like, all of those things are important, right? And it's good to be aware of them, and everybody kind of has a a scale around some of that stuff, the things that feel tolerable or necessary and needed, and the things that aren't. But ultimately they are part of the picture, the foundation of choice and decision making is coming from a place of intuition, which is born out of a place of kind of meaningfulness and significance, which hopefully will enable you to feel like you are flying when you make that choice.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one of the many reasons why I'm such a believer that, you know, cultivating a sense of purpose is one of the kind of foundational things that everyone should do for themselves in order to have a greater sense of well-being, whether it's at work or just in life, is that I think it reframes your thinking to think much more long term.
Yes.
And I think that's also where this element of like trust that everything will happen. I don't mean this in this kind of like esoteric way. I just mean it in a, you follow your sense of purpose because long term things will kind of then, through you consistently making decisions that align with that sense of purpose, things will come together, and the puzzle pieces will fit. And it means that you're not making decisions based on short-sighted, as you say, but right now I'm looking for this salary. Of course there are certain cutoff points that everyone will have and so on, and you need to survive. But I think it allows you to kind of think beyond that. So that's how I'm trying to look at it. It doesn't mean that every day you necessarily feel, super aligned with everything, but I'm trying to think that way.
And I think there's a wonderful vulnerability, Anna, in you describing that, which I think is the kind of the unspoken element of what we're saying here today. Is that we've talked a lot about intuition and emotion, yet we're having a fairly cerebral conversation, and those that are listening to this will be kind of thinking their way through what we're describing. And almost in your last comment there, you're drawing attention to the reality of the experience of this, which is it doesn't always feel positive. It doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always feel hopeful or exciting or energizing. Actually, sometimes it can feel really difficult, and that's because what matters isn't stacking up, or it isn't aligning, or it isn't coming to the fruition, and the absence of it and the difficulty and the tension of it is also part of the journey, because that's the wrestle and the effort and the work that, to your point, if you stay in and stay connected to, the long-term outputs will be you're more of the person that you want to be, and you'll see more of the experiences and goals that you want to achieve achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is, as you say, that to a certain extent, the downside is that the more you know what you want, you also become very aware of what you don't want.
Yeah.
And that means that there's a lot of attention that will automatically, as soon as something in your environment or about, just your life or choices doesn't align with that, you become very aware of it, and you become annoyed by it, or there's negative emotions attached to it. And I think it's important to highlight that it's not always going to feel positive. And that's also why, going back to my module on happiness, pleasure and purpose are two separate things. Purpose can inform pleasure, and if you have both pleasure and purpose, that's kind of the ultimate great scenario. But it doesn't mean that if something doesn't feel positive, that it means you should stop and that that's not your purpose.
Yeah.
You need to kind of be mindful, I guess, of like, why isn't it feeling positive? And is there something that I can change, or is it actually just wrong for me? There's kind of these deeper questions that come with that.
Amazing. Yeah. And so I only have one more question for you in our conversation today, which is, which house in Hogwarts do you think you would have been in if the sorting hat was placed on your head?
Look, I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say I wanted to be Gryffindor, right? Everyone wants to be Gryffindor. Am I Gryffindor? I don't know. I would like to say I'm a combination of Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, and Hufflepuff, but then who isn't? So I haven't done the test. I know that there's some kind of test out there.
There's a test?
Yeah, apparently there's some kind of quiz. I mean, this
You've
was more.
Done it.
No, I haven't.
You are Slytherin and you don't want to admit it.
I haven't. But my friend did. I remember when we were like 14, she did it, and she said she was Hufflepuff, and I judged her for it. I was like, wow, you're not Gryffindor. But then I was also aware that my outcome might not be Gryffindor either, so I just avoided the situation so that I don't even know. It's better not knowing sometimes. But I would like to make it clear I'm not Slytherin. That's all I care about.
Yeah, obviously, made totally clear. Listen, Anna, thank you so much for being with us on the Excitable Soul today. It's been great
to kind
of chat, and I know you and I could kind of talk philosophy around purpose all day long, and so it's been great to kind of get your thinking and your understanding and your research intertwined with your kind of your journey and your reality and what you're looking forward to in life. And Hogwarts is real, people.
Still waiting for my letter. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great day. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. We appreciate your support and would love you to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend if you can. It makes a massive difference. Equally, if you're interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your unique sense of purpose or that of your teams, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.